What if Anakin led the Sith against Palpatine? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. You're him. You're Darth Sidious. The words hang in the air like a death sentence. Chancellor Palpatine's mask doesn't slip. Instead, it melts away completely, revealing something ancient and coldly amused beneath. I wondered when you would finally see it, my boy. But Anakin doesn't react with shock. He doesn't stumble backward in betrayal or confusion. Instead, his eyes narrow with deadly understanding. Because in this moment, everything clicks into place like the final piece of a galactic conspiracy. The Clone Wars, both sides, the Republic, the Separatists, all of it orchestrated by the man sitting across from him. You created this war, Anakin says, his voice growing colder with each word. You've been playing everyone. The Jedi, the Senate, me. Palpatine expects submission. He expects Anakin to fall to his knees and beg to be taught the power to save Padme. But what he gets instead is something he never saw coming. You know what I learned about the real Sith during my research? Anakin's hand moves toward his lightsaber. The rule of two exists for one reason. So the apprentice destroys the master. Palpatine's confident expression flickers. This isn't going according to plan. But you? Anakin continues, standing slowly. You're not a true Sith Lord. You're a politician who discovered Force powers and decided to use them for personal gain. You hide behind clone armies and manufactured crises because you're too weak to claim power through real strength. The temperature drops. The Force itself seems to recoil. The dark side shows me the truth now, Palpatine. You've corrupted everything the Sith stood for. And if the apprentice must destroy the master to restore the true Sith legacy, blue light explodes across the opera box as Anakin's lightsaber ignites. Then so be it. What follows isn't the story anyone expected. Not Anakin's fall to become Palpatine's apprentice. Not his redemption by the Jedi, but something entirely different. Something that will tear the galaxy into 3 factions and forge an empire built on genuine strength rather than political manipulation. This is the story of how Anakin Skywalker became the leader of the true Sith, and how he used that power to destroy the master who dared to corrupt their ancient teachings. The galaxy's opera house becomes ground zero for a galactic revolution that no one saw coming. As Palpatine barely escapes with his life and Anakin disappears into Coruscant's underworld, the real war is just beginning, because the Chosen One has finally chosen his path, and it leads through shadows toward a destiny that will reshape everything. For a moment, silence hangs between them like a charged plasma field. Then, Palpatine's expression shifts. The mask of the kindly grandfather figure sliding away to reveal something ancient and coldly amused beneath. I wondered when you would finally see it, Palpatine says, his voice now carrying undertones that seem to resonate with dark power. Yes, Anakin, I am what the Jedi would call a Sith Lord. I am Darth Sidious, master of the dark side, architect of the Republic's transformation, and soon-to-be Emperor of the galaxy. But instead of the shock and confusion Palpatine clearly expects, Anakin feels something else entirely washing over him. Not surprise, but a terrible, crystalline clarity. The fog that has clouded his thoughts for months suddenly lifts, and he sees the full scope of what has been done to him, to the Jedi, to the entire galaxy. The Clone Wars, Anakin says slowly. his voice gaining strength as understanding floods through him. You created them. Both sides. The Trade Federation on Naboo, the separatist movement, even the clone army itself. You've been playing every faction against each other while positioning yourself as the only solution. Very good. Palpatine acknowledges with something approaching pride. Yes, I orchestrated the chaos that has consumed the galaxy. Every battle, every tragedy, every moment of suffering has served to demonstrate the Republic's weakness and the Jedi's inability to maintain order. Soon, the Senate will vote me emergency powers so vast that democracy will become a distant memory, replaced by the strength and certainty of Imperial rule. Anakin stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. His hand moves instinctively toward his lightsaber hilt, but he doesn't draw the weapon yet. His mind is racing, processing implications and possibilities at light speed. You've been manipulating me for years, he realizes aloud. Every private conversation, every piece of advice, every time you've driven a wedge between me and the Council, you've been grooming me to be your apprentice. Indeed. Palpatine confirms without shame. I have watched your career with great interest. Young Skywalker, your power is extraordinary, your potential limitless. The Jedi, in their fear and narrow-mindedness, have sought to constrain that potential, but I offer you something they never could. True freedom. The freedom to use your abilities without their outdated moral restrictions. The freedom to save those you love, regardless of the cost. By serving you, Anakin says flatly. By ruling beside me, Palpatine corrects, rising from his own chair with fluid grace despite his apparent age. Think of what we could accomplish together. Peace, order, justice, imposed not through the endless debates of corrupt senators or the philosophical hand-wringing of the Jedi, but through strength, through power, properly applied. For a moment, Anakin feels the pull of that vision. A galaxy where his power could actually make a difference, where he wouldn't be held back by codes and councils and endless political maneuvering, where he could protect Padme and their child without having to hide his love or pretend that attachment makes him weak. But then another realization strikes him. This one hitting with the force of a crashing starship. During his research into Sith history research he had conducted in secret, driven by curiosity about the dark side's true nature, he had learned about the ancient Sith philosophy. The Rule of Two, established by Darth Bane a millennium ago, served a specific purpose: to ensure that the Sith would grow stronger with each generation through conflict between master and apprentice. You know what I discovered during my studies in the Jedi archives? Anakin asks, his voice taking on a harder edge. I found records of the true Sith teachings, not the propaganda version you've been feeding me. The Rule of Two exists for one fundamental reason: so that the apprentice will eventually destroy the master. The Sith grows stronger through this cycle of conflict, with each generation surpassing the last. But you've perverted that entire philosophy. Palpatine's confident expression flickers slightly, a crack appearing in his composed facade. You're not building an empire to advance Sith ideals. Anakin continues, his understanding deepening with each word. You're using Sith power to create a political dynasty. You've turned the dark side into just another tool for maintaining your personal authority. The real Sith lords of ancient times would be disgusted by what you've become. You speak of things you do not understand. Palpatine begins, But Anakin cuts him off. "I understand perfectly," the young Jedi says, his voice now carrying an authority that wasn't there moments before. "You're not a true Sith Lord. You're a politician who discovered Force powers and decided to use them for personal gain. You hide behind armies of clones and manufactured crises because you're too weak to claim power through genuine strength." The temperature in the opera box seems to drop as Anakin takes a step forward, his blue eyes beginning to burn with an inner fire that speaks of power awakening. "The dark side shows me the truth now, Palpatine. You're weak. You've corrupted everything the Sith once represented, turning their philosophy of strength through conflict into a pathetic puppet show where you pull all the strings from the shadows. You don't deserve to call yourself a Sith Lord." Palpatine's mask finally slips completely, revealing the cold fury beneath. "You ungrateful child! I offered you everything: power, knowledge, the ability to save your precious Padme from the death I have shown you in your dreams. You created those visions," Anakin realizes with absolute certainty. "Another manipulation, another way to control me. But I see clearly now. If the apprentice must destroy the master to preserve the Sith legacy and restore their true teachings, then so be it." Anakin's lightsaber springs to life, its blue blade humming with deadly intent. But this time, something is different. The crystal within resonates not just with the light side of the Force, but with darker currents as well. The blade flickers, its color shifting subtly as Anakin embraces aspects of the Force he has always been taught to reject. Palpatine barely manages to throw himself backward as the lightsaber whistles through the air where his head had been a heartbeat before. The elderly senator's carefully maintained facade crumbles away entirely as crimson lightning erupts from his fingertips. "You foolish boy," he snarls, his voice now the harsh rasp of Darth Sidious. "I offered you everything, and you choose to throw it away. For what? Jedi principles that you've already abandoned. Loyalty to a republic that fears and mistrusts you. I choose to restore the true Sith teachings," Anakin replies, his lightsaber work displaying a deadly grace that combines formal Jedi training with something raw and more primal. Strength through conflict, power through victory, freedom through the Force, not slavery to your political ambitions. The confined space of the opera box becomes a whirlwind of energy and light. Anakin's lightsaber work is magnificent, each strike precisely calculated to exploit openings in Palpatine's defenses while maintaining perfect form. But Palpatine's mastery of the dark side runs deep, accumulated over decades of secret study and practice. The Sith Lord abandons any pretense of being a frail old man. He moves with inhuman speed and agility, Force lightning crackling from his hands in complex patterns that force Anakin onto the defensive. Ornate chairs and decorative elements are torn from their moorings and hurled through the air with telekinetic fury. "You cannot defeat me, boy," Palpatine hisses as he presses his attack. "I have studied the dark side for longer than you have been alive. I have planned and schemed and maneuvered for decades to reach this moment. Your raw power means nothing against experience and cunning." But Anakin's response is not the wild fury that Palpatine expects from a dark side user. Instead, his defense is methodical, almost analytical. He studies his opponent's patterns, looking for weaknesses and exploitable habits. This is not the fighting style of traditional Sith, driven by pure emotion and aggression. This is something newer, a synthesis of Jedi discipline with dark side power. You're right about one thing, Anakin admits as he deflects another barrage of Force lightning. Raw power alone isn't enough. But I have something you never did: real training in combat from masters who understood that true strength comes from discipline, not just passion. The duel intensifies as both combatants begin to draw more deeply on the Force. The opera box trembles under the strain of energies that were never meant to be unleashed in such a confined space. Below them, the performance continues. The audience unaware of the battle that will determine the fate of the galaxy raging just overhead. Palpatine's attacks become increasingly desperate as he realizes that Anakin is not fighting like a typical Sith. The young man's style is unpredictable, combining light and dark side techniques in ways that shouldn't be possible. More troubling still, Anakin seems to be growing stronger as the fight progresses, as if the conflict itself is feeding his power. This is not how it was meant to be. Palpatine snarls as he hurls a section of decorative railing at his opponent. You were to become my apprentice, my successor. Together we would have ruled for 1,000 years. Your apprentice would have been another puppet. Anakin replies, using the Force to redirect the improvised projectile back at its sender. Just like Dooku, just like Maul before him. You don't want an apprentice, Palpatine. You want a slave with a lightsaber. The words strike home with devastating accuracy. For all his power and cunning, Palpatine has never truly understood the core philosophy that made the ancient Sith strong. He has treated the rule of two as a recruitment tool rather than a sacred principle, seeking apprentices who would enhance his power rather than eventually challenge it. But Palpatine is far from defeated. With a roar of fury that seems to shake the very foundations of the Opera House, he abandons all restraint. Dark side energy pours from him in waves, warping the air itself with its malevolent intensity. The ornate decorations begin to tarnish and decay under the influence of such concentrated hatred. Anakin feels the full weight of that power crashing down on him like a tsunami of pure malevolence. For a moment, his defenses waver, and he stumbles backward under the assault. This is the true power of a Sith Lord, accumulated through years of careful cultivation and fed by a hatred so deep it has become the core of his being. But instead of being overwhelmed, Anakin finds himself adapting. The dark side energy that Palpatine is hurling at him doesn't just bounce off his defenses, it's being absorbed, transformed, and redirected. This is the technique he discovered in his secret studies, a method used by the ancient Sith to turn their enemies' power against them. Impossible. Palpatine breathes as he realizes what is happening. That technique was lost centuries ago. How could you possibly? Because I didn't just study Sith history, Anakin replies, his voice now resonating with harmonic undertones that speak of deep connection to the Force. I understood it. The ancient Sith weren't afraid to learn from their enemies. They absorbed techniques from Jedi, from other Force traditions, from anyone who could make them stronger. You've spent so long playing political games that you've forgotten what it means to truly grow in power. The revelation strikes Palpatine like a physical blow. He has indeed grown complacent, relying on manipulation and careful planning, rather than continuing to develop his mastery of the Force. The realization fills him with a fury so pure it manifests as visible distortions in the air around him. With a final, desperate surge of power, Palpatine channels everything he has into one overwhelming assault. Lightning, telekinetic force, and waves of pure dark side energy converge on Anakin's position. The attack is so intense that the reinforced transparasteel windows of the opera box begin to crack and spider. For a moment, Anakin disappears entirely within the maelstrom of dark energy. Palpatine allows himself a moment of satisfaction, certain that no one could survive such an onslaught. But then, impossibly, a blade of light cuts through the chaos. Anakin emerges from the storm of power, his lightsaber now burning with an intensity that hurts to look at directly. "My turn," he says simply. What follows is not a duel but an execution. Anakin's lightsaber work transcends anything he has ever displayed before, combining perfect technical skill with an intuitive understanding of the Force that allows him to anticipate Palpatine's every move. His blade seems to be everywhere at once, creating a pattern of light that is both beautiful and terrifying. Palpatine's defenses crumble under the assault. His lightsaber is torn from his grip by a precisely timed force pull. His attempts to use lightning are redirected back at him with compound interest. In desperation, he tries to flee. But Anakin is faster, cutting off every avenue of escape with movements that blur the line between physical action and force manipulation. The end comes suddenly. One moment, Palpatine is scrambling backward, trying to put distance between himself and his inexorably advancing opponent. The next, Anakin's lightsaber has found its mark with surgical precision. The self-proclaimed Emperor crumples to the floor, his eyes wide with disbelief that his carefully laid plans could unravel so quickly. This is not how it ends," Palpatine gasps, his voice barely audible. "The Empire, my grand design, it cannot die with me." "Your empire was never worthy of the name," Anakin replies, standing over his fallen opponent. "But perhaps it's time for a true empire to rise, one built on genuine strength rather than political manipulation." As the life fades from Palpatine's eyes, Anakin feels a profound shift in the Force around him. The oppressive weight that has hung over Coruscant for years begins to lift, but it's replaced by something else, a sense of vast possibility and equally vast responsibility. But his moment of reflection is interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps and shouting voices. Palace security forces are responding to reports of an explosion in the Chancellor's private box. Anakin realizes he has only moments before the area will be swarming with guards, investigators, and, quite possibly, Jedi. With swift efficiency, he searches Palpatine's body, retrieving hidden data cards and an encrypted comlink that likely connects to the Sith Lord's network of agents and allies. Then, using the Force to muffle the sound, he smashes through the already weakened transparasteel window and leaps into the Coruscant night. His fall is controlled, using Force techniques to slow his descent while navigating between the streams of speeder traffic that flow through the city's aerial highways. By the time security forces reach the opera box, they find only Palpatine's corpse and signs of a terrific struggle. Of Anakin Skywalker, there is no trace save for a lightsaber hilt lying among the debris, a deliberate deception to make it appear that he perished in the battle. But Anakin is very much alive, making his way through the labyrinthine depths of Coruscant's underworld. The city's lower levels, where sunlight never reaches, and the forgotten masses eke out an existence in perpetual twilight, offer perfect anonymity for someone who knows how to blend in. He finds temporary refuge in an abandoned maintenance tunnel, part of the vast network of forgotten infrastructure that keeps the planet city functioning. Here, surrounded by the hum of power conduits and the distant rumble of traffic far above, Anakin begins to plan his next moves. The data cards he retrieved from Palpatine contain a treasure trove of information: bank accounts, communication codes, the identities of secret agents throughout the Republic and separatist governments, and most importantly, detailed records of the Sith Lord's true plans for the galaxy. As Anakin scrolls through the data, his understanding of the situation deepens and his anger grows. Palpatine's scheme was even more elaborate than he had realized. The Clone Wars were indeed orchestrated from both sides, but they were merely the opening movement in a symphony of manipulation that was meant to culminate in the complete transformation of galactic civilization. Democracy wouldn't just be suspended, it would be so thoroughly discredited that populations would beg for authoritarian rule. The Jedi wouldn't simply be eliminated, they would be revealed as traitors and conspirators, their memory tainted for generations to come. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Anakin discovers evidence of other schemes, backup plans within backup plans. Palpatine had been preparing for the possibility of his own death, with contingencies in place to ensure his vision would survive even if he did not. Hidden across the galaxy are caches of weapons, loyal agents, and instructions for carrying on his work. As he processes this information, Anakin realizes that killing Palpatine was only the beginning. The network of corruption and manipulation the Sith Lord created will not simply disappear with his death. If left unchecked, it will either reassemble around a new leader or tear the galaxy apart in a chaotic free-for-all as various factions try to seize the power vacuum. But there is another path, one that Palpatine, in his arrogance, never considered. What if someone were to take control of that network, not to advance a personal agenda, but to implement a truly worthy vision for galactic governance? What if the Sith could be restored to their original purpose as bringers of order through strength, rather than as architects of chaos and manipulation? For the first time since his escape, Anakin allows himself to smile. The expression is neither kind nor comforting. It is the smile of a predator who has just realized the full extent of his hunting ground. Over the following days, as news of Chancellor Palpatine's death sends shockwaves through the Republic, Anakin begins to make contact with certain individuals mentioned in the captured files. His first priority is Count Dooku, the former Jedi who had been serving as Palpatine's apprentice under the name Darth Tyrannus. The approach requires careful planning. Dooku is no fool, and he will be expecting either treachery from his former master's other agents or attempts by the Jedi to capitalize on the chaos. Anakin needs to present himself as something unexpected, a potential ally rather than an enemy. Someone who offers genuine partnership rather than continued manipulation. The meeting takes place on Sereno, Dooku's ancestral homeworld, in the Count's private study. The room is lined with ancient texts and artifacts, a reminder of the scholarly pursuits that originally drew the former Jedi to question the orthodox teachings of the Order. Dooku sits behind an ornate desk, his posture regal despite the obvious tension in his bearing. "Anakin Skywalker," he says, without preamble, as the younger man is escorted into the room. "I was wondering when you would surface. The official reports claim you died fighting alongside Chancellor Palpatine against a Sith assassin. Yet here you are, very much alive, and if I'm not mistaken, different from when we last met. Anakin takes a seat across from the Count without waiting for permission. A deliberate display of confidence. Different how? Your presence in the Force has changed, Dooku observes, studying his visitor with the intensity of a scientist, examining a particularly interesting specimen. There's a depth to it now that wasn't there before. You've touched the dark side, haven't you? More than just touched, you've embraced it. I've embraced the truth, Anakin corrects. About the Force, about the war, and about your former master. Dooku's expression shifts slightly, wariness creeping into his features. What do you know of my master? In response, Anakin produces one of the data cards he retrieved from Palpatine's body. I know that he was playing you for a fool, just like he played everyone else. Would you like to see the real plans he had for you and the separatist movement? The recording that plays on Dooku's personal holoprojector is damning beyond any possibility of misinterpretation. Palpatine, in his Sidious persona, speaks casually about the Count's eventual fate to an unseen listener, presumably one of his other agents. Dooku has served his purpose admirably, the recorded Sidious says with chilling indifference. His leadership of the Separatists has provided exactly the kind of threat needed to justify emergency measures. But he was never meant to survive the war's conclusion. When the time comes, he will die as a traitor to both sides, a victim of his own ambitions, as far as history will record. The galaxy must see the separatist cause as utterly discredited before they will accept imperial rule. The silence that follows the recording's end stretches for long moments. When Dooku finally speaks, his voice carries a coldness that could freeze plasma. He meant to betray me from the beginning. From before the beginning, Anakin confirms. The entire separatist movement was designed to fail spectacularly, taking you and your ideals down with it. You were never his apprentice. Count you were his sacrificial pawn. Dooku's hands clench slowly into fists, the only outward sign of the fury building within him. And what of you, Skywalker? Were you meant to be his true apprentice? I was meant to be his successor, Anakin replies. Another pawn, more powerful than you, but equally expendable once he had extracted what use he could from me. But I had a different idea. He produces a second data card, this one containing footage from the Opera House confrontation. Dooku watches with growing interest as the recording shows Anakin not just fighting Palpatine, but defeating him through a combination of skill and understanding that surprises even the experienced former Jedi. You killed him, Dooku says, with something approaching admiration. I executed him, Anakin corrects, for crimes against the true Sith philosophy and for corrupting the dark side to serve petty political ambitions. The question now is what happens next. Indeed, Dooku muses, leaning back in his chair. With Sidious dead and his plans exposed, the galaxy will descend into chaos. The Republic lacks the strength to maintain order. The Separatists are leaderless and demoralized. And the Jedi. He pauses, studying Anakin intently. The Jedi will try to restore the old ways, won't they? Democracy, debate, endless committees, arguing while worlds burn. They will, Anakin agrees, and they'll fail, just as they were failing before Palpatine manipulated them into this war. The Republic was already dying when he took power. He just accelerated the process while positioning himself to profit from it. So what do you propose? Dooku asks. "Surely you haven't come here just to inform me of our former master's betrayal." Anakin leans forward, his eyes burning with an intensity that makes the very air seem to shimmer. "I propose we finish what the ancient Sith started. Not Palpatine's corrupt version, but the real thing. An empire built on genuine strength rather than manipulation. A government that rules through demonstrated competence rather than political theater. The rule of two was established to prevent the Sith from destroying themselves through infighting," Anakin interrupts. "But we're not in the same situation as Darth Bane. We're not trying to rebuild from nothing while hiding from superior enemies. We have resources, allies, and most importantly, a galaxy that's ready for strong leadership, whether they realize it or not." Dooku considers this for several minutes, his sharp mind working through implications and possibilities. "You're talking about overthrowing not just the Republic, but the entire galactic order, creating something entirely new. I'm talking about creating something worthy of the name Empire," Anakin replies. "Look at what Palpatine built, a network of manipulation and deception that required constant maintenance and increasingly desperate measures to sustain itself. Compare that to what the ancient Sith achieved when they ruled openly through strength and competence. And you believe we can succeed where they failed? I believe we can learn from their failures while building on their strengths," Anakin says. "The old Sith empires fell because they turned their power inward, consuming themselves through endless succession wars. But what if we created a system that channeled that competitive drive constructively? What if strength and ambition were rewarded with responsibility and authority, rather than just encouraging treachery?" The conversation continues deep into the night. Two powerful Force users debating philosophy and strategy while the fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance. By dawn, Count Dooku has been convinced not just of Anakin's vision, but of his capacity to achieve it. "Very well," the Count says as the first rays of Sereno's sun filter through the study windows. "I will help you build this new empire. But I want it understood that I am not simply trading one master for another. We do this as partners, or not at all. I wouldn't have it any other way," Anakin replies, extending his hand. "True strength recognizes other strength. I need allies, not servants." Their handshake seals more than just an agreement. It marks the beginning of a transformation that will reshape galactic civilization. But both men know that grand visions require careful implementation. The next phase of their plan will be far more complex than simply killing a corrupt Sith Lord. Over the following weeks, while the Republic struggles to maintain stability in the aftermath of Palpatine's death, Anakin and Dooku begin reaching out to others who might be receptive to their message. Their first recruit is Asajj Ventress, the Dathomirian warrior who had served as Dooku's assassin and sometime apprentice. Ventress meets them in a cantina on Tatooine, a location chosen specifically for its symbolic significance to Anakin. The establishment is one of the seedier venues in Mos Eisley, filled with smugglers, bounty hunters, and others who live on the margins of galactic society. Here, surrounded by beings who understand that survival often requires pragmatism over idealism, they can speak freely. "So," Ventress says, without preamble, her twin lightsabers visible at her belt, as a warning to any who might consider interrupting their conversation. "The boy who was meant to be Sidious's new apprentice has decided to play at being a Sith Lord himself. How predictable is it?" Anakin asks mildly, seemingly unperturbed by her obvious hostility. When was the last time you encountered a predictable Sith Lord who killed his own master before accepting apprenticeship? Ventress's expression shifts slightly, acknowledging the point. Dooku tells me, you have some grand plan to remake the galaxy. I'm curious to hear how you intend to succeed where beings far more experienced than yourself have failed, by learning from their mistakes. Anakin replies, tell me, Ventress, what was your experience like serving under Sidious's shadow? Did you feel valued, respected, or were you just another expendable asset in his collection? The question hits home with devastating accuracy. Ventress's jaw tightens as she recalls years of being used, discarded, and recalled as circumstances dictated. What's your point? My point is that Sidious treated everyone as disposable tools, including his supposed apprentices. That's not strength. It's waste. True strength recognizes and cultivates the potential in others, rather than simply exploiting them until they break. Dooku nods in agreement. Under the old system, your abilities were never fully developed because they might have posed a threat to the established hierarchy. Under Anakin's proposed system, those abilities would be a qualification for advancement. And what exactly is this proposed system? Ventress asks, her interest clearly piqued despite her skeptical tone. Anakin leans forward, his voice taking on the compelling quality that has swayed so many others over the years. A meritocracy based on force sensitivity, combat skill, and administrative competence. No more hereditary senators who've never faced real challenges. No more committees of bureaucrats making decisions about worlds they've never visited. Power flows to those who can wield it effectively, and responsibility is matched with authority. It sounds remarkably like the old Sith Empire, Ventress observes. The old empire had the right basic structure, Dooku explains. But it failed because it turned that competitive drive inward. Sith Lords spent more time plotting against each other than governing effectively. Our approach channels that ambition toward external challenges, expansion, development, the conquest of new territories, and the integration of new peoples. Ventress considers this for several minutes, her sharp mind working through the implications. Finally, she nods slowly. It has potential. But potential means nothing without the power to implement it. How exactly do you plan to overthrow the established order? We don't overthrow it, Anakin says with a slight smile. We let it overthrow itself, then step in to provide the alternative. The explanation that follows reveals the true scope of their strategy. Rather than launching a direct military campaign against the Republic, which would unite their enemies and likely fail, they plan to accelerate the existing processes that are already tearing galactic civilization apart. The Clone Wars have weakened both the Republic and the Separatists while demonstrating the inadequacy of democratic governance in times of crisis. With Palpatine's death, both sides are now leaderless and demoralized. Their approach will be to offer a third option. Worlds that join their growing alliance will receive immediate benefits in the form of protection, efficient governance, and economic development. Rather than conquering systems by force, they will attract them through demonstrated competence. We start in the Outer Rim, Dooku explains, activating a holographic map of the galaxy. These worlds have been neglected by the Republic for centuries and exploited by corporate interests with Senate connections. They're ready for change, and they have resources we need to build our power base. Meanwhile, Anakin continues, We use the information I recovered from Palpatine to disrupt both Republic and Separatist operations. Not enough to end the war quickly, but enough to demonstrate that neither side can provide the stability the galaxy needs. Ventress studies the map, her tactical mind already identifying key systems and strategic advantages. It could work, she admits, but you'll need more than just the three of us. Building an empire requires administrators, generals, diplomats, and countless other specialists, which brings us to our next recruitment target. Anakin says, producing another data card. The Night Sisters of Dathomir have reasons to hate Sidious that go back years. Mother Talzin has been gathering power and allies in preparation for eventual revenge. Now that Sidious is dead, she might be willing to redirect that energy toward more constructive purposes. The meeting on Dathomir takes place in the heart of the Night Sisters' ancient stronghold, surrounded by the swirling mists and twisted trees that give the planet its ominous reputation. Mother Talzin receives them in her throne chamber, a vast cavern carved from living rock and decorated with artifacts that speak of dark magics and older powers. So, the matriarch says, her voice carrying harmonics that seem to resonate in dimensions beyond the merely physical. The chosen one has finally chosen his path, and it leads through shadows rather than light. Anakin inclines his head respectfully, but does not bow. Mother Talzin, I come seeking alliance, not submission. How refreshing, Talzin replies with amusement. It has been some time since anyone approached the Night Sisters as equals rather than seeking to use us as tools or destroy us as threats. What do you offer, young Skywalker? Recognition of Dathomir's sovereignty within a new galactic order. Anakin replies immediately. Your people's traditions and way of life preserved and protected. Your knowledge and abilities valued rather than feared. In exchange, we ask for your support in building something worthy of that protection. Talzin's expression grows more serious as she considers the offer. Sidious sought to exploit our power while giving nothing in return. The Republic ignores us entirely, unless we become inconvenient. The Jedi view us as barely controlled darksiders who should be watched for signs of corruption. You offer respect and partnership, but can you deliver on such promises? I can, Anakin says with absolute conviction, because unlike the others, I understand that diversity of approach makes the whole stronger. The Jedi became weak because they rejected any aspect of the Force that didn't fit their narrow philosophy. Sidious became weak because he saw others only as extensions of his own will. True strength comes from bringing different capabilities together in service of a common goal. The negotiations that follow are complex, involving not just political agreements but careful discussions of Force philosophy and the role that various traditions might play in a new galactic order. The Night Sisters have preserved knowledge and techniques that date back thousands of years, including methods of Force manipulation that neither Jedi nor traditional Sith have mastered. By the time the talks conclude, Anakin has gained not just military allies but access to archives of Force lore that will prove invaluable in the conflicts to come. More importantly, he has demonstrated his willingness to treat with other Force traditions as equals rather than competitors or subordinates. Similar negotiations follow with other groups. The Disciples of the Wills on Jedha, whose philosophical approach to the Force offers insights into balance and harmony. The Matukai Adepts, whose techniques for enhancing physical capabilities through Force training could prove invaluable for military applications. and various independent Force users who have operated outside the traditional Jedi-Sith dichotomy for generations. Each alliance adds new capabilities to the growing coalition, while also serving as a proof of concept for Anakin's governing philosophy. Rather than demanding conformity to a single approach, he encourages diversity while maintaining focus on shared objectives. The result is a network of allies who feel valued and respected rather than merely used. But building alliances with Force users is only part of the strategy. The new empire will need conventional military forces, economic infrastructure, and administrative systems. For this, they turn to the separatist movement itself, many of whose members had been genuinely committed to independence from the Republic's corruption and inefficiency. The first major recruitment success comes on Ryloth, where the Twi'lek freedom fighters have been struggling against both Republic taxation and separatist exploitation. Cham Syndulla, leader of the resistance movement, meets with Anakin's representatives in a hidden base deep in the planet's cave systems. The Republic promises freedom while taking our resources, Syndulla explains, his leku twitching with barely contained frustration. The separatists promised independence while enslaving our people. Why should we trust yet another faction, claiming to offer something better? Because we're not claiming, replies Ahsoka Tano, who had agreed to serve as Anakin's envoy, despite her complicated feelings about her former master's transformation. We're demonstrating. Look at what's happened on the worlds that have already joined our alliance. The holographic reports she presents show dramatic improvements in living conditions, economic development, and security on systems that have aligned themselves with Anakin's emerging empire. Crime rates have plummeted, trade has expanded, and infrastructure projects are proceeding at unprecedented rates. How? Syndulla asks, studying the data with the eye of someone who has spent years fighting for his people's welfare. Competent administration backed by sufficient force to ensure compliance, Ahsoka explains. No more months of committee hearings to approve obvious necessities. No more corporate interests blocking development to protect their monopolies. Decisions are made by people who have actually visited the worlds they govern, based on real needs rather than political calculations. And the cost of this efficiency? Political freedom, as traditionally defined, Ahsoka admits. No more elections, no more senators, no more debates that accomplish nothing while people suffer. But what use is political freedom to a slave? What good is the right to vote when all candidates are bought by the same corporate interests? The conversation continues for hours, touching on everything from economic policy to Force philosophy to military strategy. By its end, Syndulla has agreed to bring Ryloth into the new alliance, adding both the planet's resources and his experienced fighters to Anakin's growing forces. Similar successes follow on other worlds as the coalition expands throughout the Outer Rim. Each new member brings unique capabilities while also serving as an example to other systems considering their options. The contrast with Republic inefficiency and separatist chaos becomes increasingly stark as Anakin's territories demonstrate what effective governance can accomplish. But the most significant recruitment comes from an unexpected source: the clone army itself. The revelation of Palpatine's true identity and his manipulation of both sides in the Clone Wars has shaken many clone commanders to their core. These are beings who were created to serve the Republic and protect its values, only to discover that their entire purpose was based on lies. Commander Cody is the first to make contact, reaching out through encrypted channels, while his battalion is stationed on a remote Republic outpost. The conversation takes place via holo-communication, with multiple layers of encryption to prevent interception. General Skywalker, Cody says, using Anakin's old military rank, despite the changed circumstances. We need to talk. I'm listening, Cody. The men are confused, sir. Everything we were told about our purpose, about why we were created, has been turned upside down. We were supposed to be the Republic's guardians, but now we find out that the war itself was orchestrated by the same people who commissioned us. What are we supposed to do with that? Anakin chooses his words carefully, knowing that this conversation could determine the loyalty of millions of clone troopers. You were created to be soldiers, Cody. That part hasn't changed. The question is what you choose to fight for now that you know the truth. And what would you have us fight for, General? The same thing you always believed in: peace, justice, and protection for those who can't protect themselves. The difference is that now you have the freedom to choose how to achieve those goals, rather than just following orders from corrupt politicians. The philosophical discussion that follows touches on questions of purpose, identity, and free will that go to the heart of clone existence. These are beings who were literally created to serve others, but the revelation of their master's deception has forced them to confront questions of individual agency that they were never meant to consider. Join us, Anakin eventually says. Help us build something worthy of the sacrifice you and your brothers have already made. Not as property of the state, but as citizens of an empire that values your service and abilities. And if we refuse, then you go your own way with our blessing and whatever support we can provide. This has to be your choice, Cody. All of you have earned the right to decide your own fate. The response comes not in words, but in actions. Over the following weeks, entire clone battalions begin defecting from Republic service, taking their equipment and vehicles with them. Not all choose to join Anakin's forces. Some prefer to establish independent communities or seek other paths. But enough make the transition to provide the new empire with a core of experienced military units. The defections send shockwaves through both the Republic and what remains of the Separatist alliance. Without the clone army, the Republic lacks the military force necessary to maintain control over its territory. Without their droid armies, the Separatists are reduced to scattered militia forces with no hope of coordinating large-scale operations. Into this power vacuum steps Anakin's coalition, offering stability and competent governance to worlds that have been caught in the middle of an increasingly pointless conflict. The transition is remarkably smooth in most systems, as populations that have suffered through years of war welcome any alternative that promises peace and prosperity. But not everyone is willing to accept the new order without a fight. The Jedi Council, meeting in emergency session on Coruscant, grapples with the implications of Anakin's transformation and the threat it poses to their traditional role in galactic affairs. He's seducing worlds with promises of efficiency and order, Master Windu observes, his tone grim as he reviews intelligence reports from across the galaxy. But what he's really offering is tyranny, dressed up in appealing rhetoric. Sense much anger in him, I do, Yoda adds sadly. But also purpose, clarity, dangerous. This makes him more dangerous than Sidious, perhaps, because he truly believes in his vision. Can he be redeemed? Obi-Wan asks. the pain in his voice evident to all present. Is there still hope of bringing him back to the light? The question, Yoda replies slowly, is whether bringing him back would serve the greater good. Wrong about many things, the Jedi have been. Blind to the Republic's corruption, we were. Complicit in its failures. Perhaps young Skywalker sees truths that we have refused to acknowledge. The debate that follows is unlike any in the Order's recent history, touching on fundamental questions about the Jedi's role in society and their responsibility for the galaxy's current state. Some masters argue for immediate military action against Anakin's growing empire. Others advocate for attempted negotiation and possible redemption. Still others suggest that the Order should withdraw from galactic politics entirely, focusing on spiritual development rather than temporal power. The division within the Jedi ranks becomes apparent when several younger masters announce their intention to defect to Anakin's cause. Led by Quinlan Vos and supported by a handful of other Jedi who have grown disillusioned with the Order's hidebound traditions, they argue that Anakin's vision offers a better path forward than continued adherence to failed philosophies. The Jedi Code served its purpose for 1,000 generations, Vos explains to the assembled council. But the galaxy has changed, and we have not changed with it. We clung to outdated principles while worlds burned and people suffered. Anakin offers something different, pragmatic idealism backed by the power to implement real solutions. You speak of abandoning everything the Jedi represent. Windu replies, his voice heavy with disappointment. I speak of evolving beyond the limitations that made us irrelevant, Vos counters. The light side of the Force encompasses more than just passive acceptance of injustice. Sometimes, true compassion requires decisive action against those who would oppress others. The schism within the Jedi Order deepens as news of the defection spreads. Some masters who remain loyal to traditional teachings begin to view their former colleagues as traitors and dark side adherents. Others recognize the validity of their concerns while disagreeing with their chosen solution. Meanwhile, Anakin continues to consolidate power and expand his influence throughout the galaxy. The empire he is building bears little resemblance to Palpatine's vision or the Republic it replaced. Administrative positions are filled based on competence rather than political connections. Military ranks are earned through demonstrated skill rather than purchased or inherited. Justice is swift and impartial, unencumbered by the legal technicalities that allowed the wealthy and connected to escape consequences for their actions. The transformation is perhaps most visible on Coruscant itself, where Anakin has established his new capital. The planet's upper levels, once reserved for senators and corporate executives, have been converted into administrative centers and public facilities. The lower levels, long neglected and abandoned to crime and decay, become the focus of massive infrastructure projects that provide both employment and improved living conditions for the billions of beings who call the planet home. This is what government should look like, Anakin explains to a gathering of newly appointed administrators, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast assembly hall through Force-enhanced acoustics. Not endless debates about what should be done while people suffer, but immediate action based on clear principles and backed by the power necessary to implement solutions. The principles he outlines are deceptively simple. Strength serves justice, power protects the weak, and authority must be earned through demonstrated competence, but their implementation requires a fundamental restructuring of galactic society that goes far beyond mere political reform. Trade routes are secured by imperial fleets, rather than being left to the mercy of pirates and corporate militias. Worlds that cannot defend themselves receive protection in exchange for reasonable tribute. Disputes between systems are resolved by imperial mediators with the authority to enforce their decisions rather than being allowed to fester in endless legal proceedings. Perhaps most significantly, Force-sensitive individuals are no longer restricted to the binary choice between Jedi and Sith philosophies. Anakin's empire actively recruits and trains Force users from all traditions, creating a new order that combines the best aspects of various approaches while rejecting the limitations that made each individual path incomplete. The Force is vast and diverse. Anakin explains to the first class of Imperial Force adepts, young beings drawn from across the galaxy who show sensitivity to the cosmic power. The Jedi seek to impose uniformity through rigid codes and suppression of emotion. The traditional Sith embrace chaos through unlimited indulgence of passion. Both approaches limit your potential by denying essential aspects of the Force itself. The training methods he implements draw from Jedi discipline and Sith power, but also incorporate techniques learned from the Night Sisters, the disciples of the Wills, and other traditions. Students learn to channel both light and dark aspects of the Force, as circumstances require, developing a flexibility and adaptability that neither traditional order could match. The results are impressive. Imperial Force users demonstrate capabilities that surpass what either Jedi or Sith typically achieve, able to heal as effectively as they destroy, to inspire as powerfully as they intimidate. More importantly, they remain grounded in practical reality rather than becoming lost in philosophical abstractions or consumed by personal ambition. But Anakin's greatest achievement may be his success in ending the Clone Wars themselves. With the death of Palpatine and the exposure of his manipulations, the fundamental premises underlying the conflict have been revealed as fraudulent. The Separatist grievances against Republic corruption were legitimate, but their leadership was compromised by Sith manipulation. The Republic's desire for peace and stability was genuine, but their methods were ineffective, and their government was infiltrated by their enemies. Rather than simply defeating one side or the other, Anakin offers a synthesis that addresses the legitimate concerns of both factions while rejecting their failed methodologies. Former Separatist worlds received the independence and self-determination they sought, but within an imperial framework that provides security and economic opportunity. Former Republic systems retain their essential character and traditions, but benefit from more efficient governance and protection from external threats. The transition is not without its challenges. Some Republic loyalists, particularly among the core world's elite, resist the loss of their privileged positions. Certain Separatist hardliners refuse to accept any form of central authority, even one that respects local autonomy. And the Jedi Order remains divided over how to respond to Anakin's transformation and the empire he represents. These tensions come to a head during the Battle of Coruscant, a confrontation that will determine whether Anakin's vision can survive challenge from its most determined opponents. The battle is not a single engagement, but a campaign lasting several days, involving space combat around the planet, ground fighting in the city's depths, and a series of political and philosophical confrontations that prove as decisive as any military action. The space battle begins when a combined fleet of Republic loyalists and Jedi forces arrives in the Coruscant system, intending to retake the capital and restore the old order. The fleet is substantial, including many of the Republic's most advanced warships and crewed by personnel who remained loyal to democratic ideals, despite the revelations about Palpatine's manipulations. But they face an Imperial fleet that represents something entirely new in galactic warfare. Anakin's ships are crewed not by conscripts or clones, but by volunteers who genuinely believe in their cause. Their tactics combine the best of Republic training with separatist innovation, enhanced by Force-sensitive coordinators who can anticipate enemy movements and coordinate responses with superhuman precision. The battle's turning point comes when several Republic ships actually defect to the Imperial side mid-engagement. These are crews who have witnessed the efficiency and justice of Imperial governance firsthand, and have come to believe that Anakin's vision offers a better future than restoration of the old system. All Republic vessels. Anakin's voice broadcasts across all frequencies. You are fighting to restore a government that was corrupt, inefficient, and manipulated by its enemies. I offer you the chance to build something better. Join us and help create a galaxy worthy of the sacrifices you've already made. The response splits the Republic fleet as individual commanders make their own choices about which side truly represents their values. Some remain loyal to democratic principles despite their awareness of the Republic's flaws. Others conclude that Anakin's Imperial system offers a more practical path to the peace and justice they originally swore to defend. The ground battle proves even more decisive. Imperial forces defending Coruscant include not just military units, but civilian volunteers who have benefited from the new government's policies. Former criminals who found honest work in Imperial infrastructure projects fight alongside clone troopers who chose to serve a cause they believe in rather than simply following orders. Against them, the attacking forces must contend not only with organized military resistance, but with a population that largely supports the government they're trying to overthrow. This is not an occupying army fighting a hostile populace, but an invading force attempting to impose its will on people who have chosen their own path. The most significant confrontation occurs in the former Jedi Temple, now converted into an academy for training Imperial Force adepts. Here, Anakin faces a strike team of Jedi Masters, led by Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Yoda himself. The encounter is both a physical battle and a clash of philosophies that will determine the future of Force tradition in the galaxy. Anakin, Obi-Wan, says as the Jedi Masters enter the temple's main hall, their lightsabers ignited, but not yet raised in attack. This doesn't have to end in violence. There's still time to choose a different path. I have chosen my path, Master. Anakin replies, standing calmly before them with his own blade deactivated. The question is whether you can accept that it might be the right one. You've embraced the dark side, Windu states flatly. You've built an empire on fear and oppression, just as Palpatine intended. Have I? Anakin asks, activating a holographic display that shows conditions across Imperial territory. Crime rates down 70%. Infrastructure development up 300%. Trade volume increasing, despite the end of wartime production. Populations reporting higher satisfaction with government services than at any point in recorded history. If this is oppression, Master Windu, then perhaps oppression serves the people better than freedom. The debate that follows touches on fundamental questions about the nature of government, the role of force users in society, and the relationship between power and responsibility. The Jedi argue for the importance of individual liberty and democratic governance, even when such systems prove inefficient or vulnerable to corruption. Anakin counters that true freedom requires security and prosperity, which can only be maintained through effective leadership, backed by sufficient force. "You speak of serving the people," Yoda observes, "but rule them without their consent, you do. How different from Palpatine's tyranny is this?" "In every way that matters," Anakin replies with conviction. "Palpatine ruled through deception and manipulation, hiding his true nature while playing factions against each other. I rule openly, through demonstrated competence and genuine concern for those under my protection. The people may not vote for their leaders, but they benefit from governance by individuals who actually possess the skills and knowledge necessary to make effective decisions." "And when those leaders become corrupt?" Obi-Wan asks. "When power inevitably corrupts those who wield it, then they are replaced by those stronger and more capable," Anakin answers. "That's how the system self-corrects, through competition and accountability to results, rather than rhetoric." The philosophical debate is interrupted by reports of fighting elsewhere in the city. Despite the presence of their leaders in the temple, the battle for Coruscant continues to rage across multiple fronts. Both sides recognize that this conversation, as important as it may be, will ultimately be decided by events beyond this chamber. But the personal stakes could not be higher. For the Jedi, this represents a final attempt to reclaim one of their own from the darkness they believe has consumed him. For Anakin, it's an opportunity to demonstrate that his path offers something genuinely superior to the failed approaches of the past. The turning point comes when reports arrive of the battle's conclusion elsewhere. Imperial forces have successfully repelled the invasion, but more significantly, the majority of Republic military units have either surrendered or defected to the Imperial cause. The attempt to restore the old order has failed not through military defeat alone, but because most of those involved have come to believe that the old order was not worth restoring. Faced with this reality, the Jedi Masters must make their own choice about whether to continue fighting for a cause that no longer commands popular support, or to accept that the galaxy has moved beyond their traditional role. "The war is over," Anakin says quietly. "The question now is whether you'll help me build something better, or whether you'll cling to the past while the future passes you by." The response splits the Jedi along generational and philosophical lines. Yoda, representing the wisdom of centuries, chooses to withdraw from galactic politics entirely, leading those Jedi who wish to preserve traditional teachings into exile in the unknown regions. Mace Windu, convinced that Anakin represents an irredeemable threat to liberty, continues to oppose the Empire through underground resistance activities. But Obi-Wan, perhaps because of his personal connection to Anakin, or perhaps because he recognizes the genuine improvements Imperial rule has brought to countless worlds, makes a different choice. He agrees to serve the new order, not as a traditional Jedi, but as an advisor and teacher who can help ensure that Anakin's vision remains true to its stated ideals. "I still believe there's light in you," he tells his former Padawan as they stand together on the temple's highest balcony, looking out over a Coruscant that has been transformed by Imperial governance. But perhaps the light doesn't always look the way we expected it to. The conversation that follows marks the beginning of a new relationship between two of the galaxy's most powerful Force users. No longer master and apprentice, no longer bound by Jedi codes or Sith traditions, they work together to develop approaches to Force training and galactic governance that draw from all available wisdom while remaining grounded in practical reality. In the months that follow, Anakin's empire continues to expand and evolve. New worlds join voluntarily, attracted by the stability and prosperity that Imperial membership provides. Administrative systems mature and become more efficient as experience reveals better approaches to common problems. The integration of various Force traditions produces innovations in both philosophy and practical application that surpass anything either Jedi or Sith achieved alone. But perhaps most significantly, the Empire begins to look beyond the known galaxy itself. Exploratory missions discover new star systems, new species, and new challenges that require continued growth and adaptation. The competitive drive that once turned Sith against each other is now channeled toward expansion and development, pushing the boundaries of what's possible while maintaining internal stability through shared purpose. As Emperor, Anakin finds himself grappling with responsibilities and challenges that would have been unimaginable during his days as a young Jedi. But he faces them with resources and capabilities that no previous galactic leader has possessed. The combined wisdom of multiple Force traditions, the loyalty of populations who have benefited from his governance, and the support of allies who share his vision for a better future. But before the Empire could fully consolidate its power, it faced its greatest test yet. The news of the Republic fleet's defeat at Coruscant sent shockwaves through the remaining separatist strongholds and neutral systems. Many saw the writing on the wall and began opening diplomatic channels with Anakin's representatives. But others, particularly the most extreme factions on both sides, saw this as their last chance to prevent what they viewed as an unacceptable outcome. The Techno-Union, still controlled by Wat Tambor despite the chaos following Palpatine's death, gathered the remnants of the droid army on Mustafar. The volcanic world's industrial facilities had been retooled to mass-produce battle droids at an unprecedented rate, powered by desperation and the knowledge that failure meant irrelevance in the new galactic order. The organic empire will crumble, Tambor declared to his assembled droid commanders, his mechanical voice echoing through the obsidian conference chamber. Biological beings are weak, emotional, unpredictable. They will destroy themselves through the very passions that the false emperor claims give them strength. We need only accelerate the process. Meanwhile, on the core world of Alsakan, a coalition of Republic hardliners, led by Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, refused to acknowledge the legitimacy of imperial rule. These were beings who genuinely believed in democratic ideals, not corrupt politicians seeking to preserve their privileges. Their resistance was motivated by principle rather than self-interest, making them far more dangerous than the opportunists who had already surrendered. Freedom is not negotiable, Organa declared to the assembled senators and military officers who had gathered in Alsakan's ancient capital building. We may not have the strength to defeat this empire in open battle, but we can ensure that the ideals of the Republic survive until a new generation rises to reclaim them. Between these two extremes stood countless worlds caught in uncertainty. The Clone Wars had exhausted their resources and devastated their populations. The promise of peace under Imperial rule was attractive, but many remembered similar promises from Palpatine during his rise to power. How could they know that Anakin's empire would prove any more trustworthy? It was this uncertainty that Anakin sought to address through a series of public demonstrations of imperial governance. Rather than simply announcing policies through official channels, he began making personal appearances on contested worlds, allowing skeptical populations to observe his methods firsthand. The first such visit took place on Malastare, a world that had suffered severely during the Clone Wars. Due to its strategic location along major hyperspace routes, the planet's capital city bore the scars of repeated battles, with entire districts reduced to rubble and millions of refugees crowding into makeshift camps. Anakin arrived not with a massive military escort, but with a modest fleet of transport ships carrying relief supplies, construction equipment, and teams of specialists. His first stop was not the planetary government building, but the largest refugee camp on the planet's surface. "I am not here to make speeches or promises," he announced to the assembled crowds, his voice carrying clearly through the Force to every being present despite the lack of amplification systems. "I am here to work alongside you in rebuilding what the war destroyed." What followed was unlike anything the refugees had experienced from previous government officials. Anakin rolled up his sleeves and began personally distributing food supplies. His Force abilities allowing him to move massive crates with ease, while maintaining constant interaction with the people receiving aid. More importantly, he listened to their stories, their complaints, their suggestions for improvement. A dug mechanic approached him hesitantly, speaking in broken basic about the need for better tools to repair the salvaged vehicles that provided the camp's only transportation. Within an hour, Anakin had requisitioned a complete workshop from his supply ships and was helping the mechanic organize the new equipment. A Gran family explained their difficulty finding medical care for their elderly patriarch. Anakin personally carried the old being to the medical ship and stayed with the family, while Imperial doctors provided treatment. But perhaps most significantly, he involved the refugees themselves in decision-making about their own welfare. Rather than imposing solutions from above, he asked what they needed most urgently and worked with local leaders to implement practical responses. When disagreements arose between different species or cultural groups, he mediated personally, using his understanding of the Force to sense underlying concerns that pure logic might miss. "This is how government should function," he explained to a gathering of Malastare's traditional leaders later that evening. "Not through distant bureaucracies that treat people as statistics, but through direct engagement with those we serve. Power without responsibility is tyranny. Responsibility without power is worthless. But power exercised in service of those who cannot protect themselves, that is the foundation of legitimate authority." The transformation of Malastare over the following weeks became a template for imperial governance throughout the galaxy. Infrastructure projects employed local workers at fair wages while teaching them new skills. Educational programs brought literacy and technical training to communities that had been neglected for generations. Medical facilities provided care without regard to species, homeworld, or ability to pay. But most importantly, local authorities were integrated into the imperial system rather than replaced by outside administrators. Planetary governors kept their positions if they demonstrated competence and genuine concern for their people's welfare. Those who proved corrupt or ineffective were removed, but their replacements were chosen from among respected local figures who understood their world's unique needs and cultures. The success on Malastare was replicated across dozens of other worlds as Anakin's empire expanded through demonstration rather than conquest. Each successful integration made resistance seem increasingly futile. while providing concrete evidence that imperial rule offered genuine benefits rather than mere propaganda promises. This approach proved particularly effective with the many species that had been marginalized under Republic rule. The Wookiees of Kashyyyk, enslaved by separatist forces and largely ignored by Republic authorities, found themselves treated as equals within the imperial system. Their traditional leadership structures were respected and incorporated into planetary governance, while their engineering expertise was valued and rewarded through major infrastructure contracts. Similarly, the Twi'leks of Ryloth discovered that imperial rule meant an end to the exploitation that had plagued their world for centuries. The spice mines that had enriched off-world corporations while impoverishing local communities were nationalized and operated for the benefit of Ryloth's population. Cultural practices that the Republic had merely tolerated were actively celebrated and protected under imperial law. But the most dramatic transformation occurred on Tatooine itself. Anakin's return to his homeworld as Emperor carried profound symbolic weight, representing the ultimate victory of the powerless over those who had oppressed them. The announcement of his visit sent tremors through the planet's criminal underworld, as beings who had profited from misery for generations suddenly faced the prospect of accountability. The Hutt crime families, led by Jabba's surviving relatives, initially attempted to negotiate with the new imperial authorities. They offered tribute, information about their rivals, even their services as administrators of the planet's more unsavory but necessary functions. But Anakin's response was swift and absolute. Tatooine will be cleansed, he declared upon landing at the same spaceport where he had first met Qui-Gon Jinn decades earlier. Every slave will be freed. Every crime boss will face justice. Every corrupt official will be removed from power. This world will become a symbol of what is possible when strength serves justice rather than exploitation. The campaign to liberate Tatooine lasted only days in military terms, but its effects rippled throughout the Outer Rim for months afterward. Imperial forces, many of them former slaves themselves, showed no mercy to those who had profited from the bondage of others. Jabba's palace was stormed, and its defenders scattered. The gladiatorial arenas were shut down and their operators arrested. Most significantly, the computerized records of slave ownership were seized and used to track down every single being held in bondage on the planet. The liberation process revealed the staggering scope of slavery on Tatooine. Hundreds of thousands of beings from dozens of species had been reduced to property, their lives considered valuable only for the labor they could provide or the entertainment their suffering might generate. Many had been born into bondage and knew no other existence. Others were refugees from war zones, sold into slavery to pay for passage to what they thought would be safety. But liberation was only the beginning of their transformation. Anakin understood that simply declaring people free meant nothing if they lacked the resources and skills necessary to build independent lives. The Imperial relief efforts on Tatooine became the largest humanitarian operation in the galaxy's recorded history, involving the coordinated efforts of thousands of specialists working to integrate former slaves into productive society. Educational programs taught basic literacy and numeracy to beings who had been deliberately kept ignorant. Job training provided marketable skills that allowed former slaves to support themselves and their families with dignity. Medical treatment addressed the physical and psychological trauma that bondage had inflicted across generations. Perhaps most importantly, cultural restoration programs helped various species reconnect with traditions and identities that slavery had attempted to erase. The former slave markets of Mos Espa were converted into schools and hospitals, The gladiatorial arenas became community centers where freed beings could gather to share their experiences and support each other through the difficult process of building new lives. Even Jabba's palace, once a symbol of corruption and cruelty, was transformed into a museum dedicated to preserving the memory of slavery's horrors while celebrating the triumph of liberation. But the transformation of Tatooine served purposes beyond humanitarian relief. It demonstrated to the entire galaxy that Anakin's empire possessed both the will and the capability to address problems that previous governments had either ignored or actively perpetuated. The success of the liberation effort sent a clear message to oppressive regimes throughout known space. Change your ways voluntarily, or have change imposed upon you by force. This message was not lost on the remaining separatist and Republic holdouts who still resisted imperial authority. The speed and effectiveness of the Tatooine operation revealed that Anakin's forces had achieved a level of coordination and capability that surpassed anything either side had demonstrated during the Clone Wars. Wat Tambor, monitoring the situation from his stronghold on Mustafar, recognized that his droid armies alone would not be sufficient to challenge the new Empire's military superiority. He began reaching out to other opposition forces, seeking to create an alliance of convenience between separatist remnants and Republic loyalists who shared a common goal of preventing imperial domination. The negotiations took place in secret on the neutral world of Botha, with representatives from various anti-imperial factions meeting to discuss strategy and coordination. The diversity of the gathering reflected the unusual circumstances that had brought traditional enemies together. Separatist military commanders sat alongside Republic senators, while crime syndicate leaders negotiated with Jedi survivors who had refused to accept Anakin's transformation. We may disagree on what should replace the current system, Senator Organa addressed the assembled delegates. But we must be united in our opposition to this imperial tyranny. Democracy may be imperfect, but it is preferable to the most efficient dictatorship. The alliance that emerged from these talks was fragmented and unstable, held together only by shared opposition to Anakin's rule rather than any positive vision for the galaxy's future. But it possessed considerable resources, the industrial capacity of surviving separatist worlds, the legitimacy that some Republic loyalists still commanded among core world populations, the financial resources of criminal organizations, and the specialized skills of rogue Jedi who had mastered techniques unknown to Imperial Force users. Their strategy was to avoid direct confrontation with Imperial military forces while conducting asymmetric warfare designed to undermine public confidence in the new government. Terrorist attacks on Imperial facilities, assassination attempts against key officials, propaganda campaigns highlighting the authoritarian nature of the system, and support for local resistance movements on occupied worlds. The first major operation of this alliance targeted the Imperial supply lines that connected core worlds to Outer Rim territories. A coordinated series of attacks destroyed transport convoys, damaged hyperspace beacons, and disrupted communication networks across multiple sectors simultaneously. The goal was to demonstrate that the Empire could not protect its own infrastructure, let alone the populations under its authority. But the attackers had underestimated both the Emperor's strategic capabilities and his personal commitment to protecting those who had placed their trust in him. Rather than responding with conventional military tactics, Anakin implemented a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy that addressed the root causes of rebellion while systematically dismantling the terrorist network. The investigation into the convoy attacks was led by Ahsoka Tano, whose experience with both Republic intelligence operations and Jedi investigative techniques made her ideally suited for tracking down the perpetrators. Working with a team of specialists that included former clone intelligence officers, reformed criminals who understood smuggling networks, and Force-sensitive analysts who could detect deception through psychic means, she began tracing the attacks back to their sources. The breakthrough came when Imperial forces captured a damaged Separatist frigate attempting to flee the scene of a failed ambush. Rather than simply interrogating the crew through conventional methods, Ahsoka used her understanding of various species' psychology to identify which captured personnel were most likely to cooperate in exchange for lenient treatment. "I know you believe you're fighting for freedom," she told a captured Sullustan navigator, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her effective as both a Jedi and an Imperial agent. "But look at what your freedom fighting has accomplished." Supply convoys carrying medical supplies to refugee camps, communication networks that connected isolated communities to emergency services, infrastructure that benefited millions of innocent beings who had nothing to do with politics. The Navigator's response revealed the fundamental flaw in the Resistance Alliance's strategy. Many of the beings carrying out attacks had no clear understanding of what they were actually targeting or why. They had been told they were striking at symbols of oppression. But the reality was that they were undermining systems that provided essential services to vulnerable populations. This intelligence breakthrough allowed Imperial forces to begin dismantling the terrorist network systematically. Rather than simply arresting suspected rebels, they implemented a strategy of rehabilitation that offered alternatives to violence while addressing the legitimate grievances that had driven beings to join the resistance in the first place. Former Separatist military officers were offered positions in the Imperial fleet, where their experience and tactical knowledge could be put to constructive use. Republic loyalists concerned about democratic representation were invited to participate in Imperial advisory councils, where their perspectives could influence policy development. Even criminal organization members found opportunities for legitimate employment in Imperial security forces, where their knowledge of underworld networks proved valuable for anti-corruption efforts. But the most significant victory came with the capture of Wat Tambor himself during a raid on the Mustafar droid production facility. The Techno-Union leader had grown overconfident, believing that his remote location and automated defenses made him untouchable. He failed to account for Anakin's personal involvement in the operation. The Emperor led the assault personally, his mastery of the Force allowing him to disable the facility's defenses while minimizing casualties among both Imperial troops and the enslaved workers who had been forced to operate the droid assembly lines. The battle was brief but decisive, culminating in a confrontation between Anakin and Tambor in the depths of the volcanic facility. "You cannot stop progress," Tambor declared, as his final droid bodyguards were systematically destroyed by Imperial forces. "Organic beings are flawed, limited, destined for obsolescence. Only through mechanical perfection can the galaxy achieve true efficiency. Perfection without purpose is meaningless," Anakin replied, his lightsaber cutting through the last of the battle droids with contemptuous ease. "Your machines are tools, nothing more. They serve whoever programs them, which means they can never be more than reflections of their creator's limitations." The capture of Tambor and the destruction of the Mustafar production facility marked the effective end of organized separatist resistance. Without the ability to mass-produce military equipment, the remaining holdout systems lacked the resources necessary to continue effective opposition to imperial expansion. But the Republic loyalist movement proved more resilient, largely because it was based on principles rather than mere military capability. Senator Organa's coalition had established hidden bases throughout the galaxy, supported by populations that genuinely believed in democratic governance despite its flaws. These were not criminals or opportunists, but idealists who saw the Empire as a betrayal of everything their civilization had achieved over millennia of political evolution. The confrontation between these two visions of galactic governance came to a head during the siege of Alderaan, the final major stronghold of Republic resistance. The planet had declared independence from imperial authority and requested recognition from other democratic governments throughout known space. Several core worlds had responded favorably, creating a potential foundation for a new confederation that could serve as an alternative to imperial rule. Anakin's response to this challenge revealed the maturity his governance philosophy had achieved through years of practical implementation. Rather than launching an immediate military assault on Alderaan, he requested a public debate with Senator Organa to be broadcast throughout the galaxy and allow populations to judge between competing visions for themselves. The debate took place in the Senate chamber on Coruscant, the same hall where Palpatine had once declared himself emperor amid thunderous applause. But the atmosphere this time was very different. Representatives from across the galaxy attended, not as legislators voting on predetermined outcomes, but as witnesses to a genuine discussion of fundamental principles. Senator Organa, Anakin began, his voice carrying none of the artificial charisma that had characterized Palpatine's speeches. You speak of freedom and democracy as though they are inherently good, regardless of their practical consequences. But I ask you, what use is political freedom to beings who lack economic security? What value does the right to vote have when all candidates are purchased by the same corporate interests? Organa's response was thoughtful and well-reasoned, acknowledging the challenges of democratic governance while defending its essential legitimacy. Your Majesty raises valid concerns about the Republic's failures, but those failures stemmed from corruption and complacency, not from democracy itself. The solution is to reform our institutions, not to abandon them entirely in favor of autocracy, however benevolent it may claim to be. The debate that followed explored every aspect of governance philosophy. The relationship between individual liberty and collective welfare, the role of expertise versus popular will in decision-making, the importance of accountability mechanisms for those in power, and the question of whether efficient authoritarianism could coexist with meaningful personal freedom. But perhaps more importantly, the debate allowed both leaders to present their competing visions through concrete examples rather than abstract principles. Anakin pointed to the transformed refugee camps, the liberated slave worlds, the infrastructure projects that had connected isolated communities to galactic civilization. Organa countered with examples of imperial overreach, the suppression of dissent, and the concentration of power in the hands of a single individual who might not always make wise decisions. The fundamental question, Organa concluded, is whether we trust ourselves to govern our own lives, with all the messiness and inefficiency that entails, or whether we surrender that responsibility to someone else, however capable they may appear to be. The fundamental question, Anakin replied, is whether we prioritize theoretical ideals or practical results. I have seen what democratic governance produced. Corruption, inequality, exploitation, and war. I have also seen what competent administration can achieve: prosperity, justice, security, and peace. The choice seems clear to me. The audience reaction was mixed, reflecting the deep divisions that existed throughout galactic society. Many beings who had suffered under Republic corruption and neglect found Anakin's arguments compelling. Others, particularly those from worlds with strong democratic traditions, remained convinced that Organa's position better served long-term stability and justice. But the debate's real impact came from its aftermath. Rather than demanding immediate submission from Alderaan and its allies, Anakin proposed a compromise that surprised both his supporters and his opponents. Worlds that preferred democratic governance would be allowed to maintain their traditional systems, but within an imperial framework that provided security, infrastructure, and coordination of interplanetary affairs. "Let us test both approaches," he suggested. "Democratic worlds can govern themselves as they see fit, while imperial territories continue developing under direct administration. In 50 years, we can evaluate which system has better served its people's welfare and adjust accordingly." This proposal split the Republic resistance movement. Moderate leaders like Organa saw it as an opportunity to preserve democratic institutions while gaining access to imperial resources and protection. Hardliners viewed it as a trap that would gradually erode local autonomy until imperial authority became total. The schism came to a head when several major democratic worlds, including Alderaan itself, voted to accept Anakin's compromise. They would maintain internal self-governance while acknowledging imperial authority over defense, foreign relations, and interplanetary commerce. In exchange, they would receive infrastructure, investment, security guarantees, and representation in imperial advisory councils. But other worlds, led by a coalition of Corellian independence advocates and Bothan separatists, rejected any form of imperial authority whatsoever. They declared the formation of a Free Worlds Alliance, dedicated to absolute independence from all central government, whether democratic or imperial. This development forced Anakin to confront the limits of his political philosophy. Could an empire truly claim to serve justice and order while allowing part of the galaxy to exist in anarchic independence? Or did the welfare of billions of beings require imposing unity even on those who preferred chaos to authority? The answer came through a series of crises that demonstrated the practical consequences of the Free Worlds Alliance's rejection of central authority. Without coordinated security forces, their territories became havens for piracy and organized crime. Without regulated commerce, their economies were manipulated by predatory corporations seeking to exploit regulatory arbitrage. Without unified infrastructure development, their populations found themselves increasingly isolated from galactic civilization. Most tragically, without coordinated disaster response capabilities, they proved unable to address a series of natural catastrophes that struck multiple Alliance worlds simultaneously. Solar flares disrupted planetary power grids. Asteroid impacts devastated agricultural regions. Plague outbreaks spread unchecked through systems that lacked the medical resources to contain them. The Imperial response to these crises revealed the evolution of Anakin's character and governing philosophy. Rather than using the Alliance's suffering as an opportunity for conquest or propaganda, he ordered massive humanitarian aid operations that provided assistance without demanding political submission in return. Imperial medical ships arrived in plague-affected systems and began treating victims without regard to their world's political status. Relief supplies were distributed to disaster areas by imperial logistics networks that operated with efficiency no local government could match. Most significantly, imperial engineers worked around the clock to restore infrastructure that had been damaged by natural disasters, asking nothing in return except the opportunity to help. We do this not because these beings acknowledge our authority, Anakin explained to his cabinet during one of the relief planning sessions, but because they are sentient creatures whose suffering we have the power to alleviate. That power creates an obligation that transcends political boundaries. The effectiveness of the imperial disaster response created a profound shift in public opinion throughout the Free Worlds Alliance. Populations that had been convinced of imperial tyranny found themselves rescued by the very forces they had been taught to fear. The contrast between imperial competence and local government inadequacy became impossible to ignore. Within months, dozens of Alliance worlds had petitioned for admission to the Empire, not through conquest or coercion, but through genuine recognition that imperial governance offered advantages they could not achieve independently. The Free Worlds Alliance effectively collapsed as its member systems chose practical benefits over ideological purity. But the most significant transformation occurred among the remaining Jedi, who had spent years grappling with the implications of Anakin's rise and the failure of their traditional approach to galactic affairs. The effectiveness of imperial governance, combined with Anakin's demonstrated commitment to protecting the innocent and serving justice, forced many to reconsider their opposition to his rule. Master Luminara Unduli, who had initially fled to the unknown regions with other Jedi traditionalists, returned to Imperial space to observe the new order firsthand. What she discovered challenged every assumption she had held about the relationship between power and corruption. "I expected to find a galaxy groaning under tyrannical oppression," she confided to Obi-Wan during their reunion on Coruscant. "Instead, I found worlds prospering under competent administration. I expected to see the dark side, consuming everything in its path. Instead, I found Force users who had learned to balance light and darkness in service of genuine compassion." Her report to the Jedi survivors in exile sparked intense debate about the nature of the Force itself and the role that Jedi should play in galactic affairs. Some maintained that any compromise with the dark side inevitably led to corruption and tyranny. Others argued that the traditional Jedi approach had proven inadequate for addressing the galaxy's real problems. The schism within the Jedi ranks paralleled the broader political divisions that had shaped the Empire's rise. But unlike the military and political opposition that had been overcome through demonstration and practical success, the philosophical opposition within the Force-using community required a different approach. Anakin's solution was to establish the Academy of Force Studies on the ancient Jedi world of Tython, where representatives of all Force traditions could gather to study, debate, and develop new approaches to understanding the cosmic power that shaped galactic destiny. The Academy was explicitly non-political, focusing on philosophical and practical questions rather than governance or military applications. The Force is vast beyond any single tradition's ability to comprehend, Anakin explained during the Academy's dedication ceremony, addressing an audience that included Jedi Masters, Sith scholars, Night Sister elders, and representatives of dozens of other Force-using cultures. By bringing together different perspectives and approaches, we can develop understanding that surpasses what any of us could achieve alone. The Academy's establishment marked a new phase in galactic Force philosophy. one that moved beyond the binary opposition between light and dark that had characterized millennia of conflict. Students learned to channel various aspects of the Force as circumstances required, developing flexibility and adaptability that made them more effective servants of justice and order. But perhaps more importantly, the Academy served as a symbol of the Empire's commitment to intellectual freedom and cultural diversity, rather than imposing a single orthodox approach to Force training. It encouraged experimentation and innovation while maintaining focus on practical applications that served the greater good. The success of this approach became apparent during the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, an extragalactic threat that tested every aspect of Imperial governance and Force philosophy. The alien invaders possessed technology that operated outside conventional understanding of physics and the Force, requiring entirely new tactical approaches and strategic thinking. The unified response to this crisis demonstrated how thoroughly Anakin's empire had transformed galactic civilization. Former Republic worlds and separatist territories fought side by side under Imperial coordination. Democratic enclaves contributed their population's creativity and innovation to the war effort while accepting strategic direction from Imperial military commanders. Force users from all traditions collaborated in developing new techniques specifically designed to counter Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology. Most significantly, the invasion revealed that Anakin's synthesis of light and dark side techniques had produced capabilities that neither traditional Jedi nor Sith could have achieved independently. His ability to sense Yuuzhan Vong intentions despite their Force immunity, to coordinate massive fleet actions through telepathic links with his commanders, and to inspire loyalty and courage in beings facing an utterly alien enemy, demonstrated that his path had indeed led to powers greater than either side alone could offer. The victory over the Yuuzhan Vong, achieved with relatively minimal casualties compared to what traditional galactic civilization might have suffered, cemented Anakin's reputation as not merely a successful conqueror, but a transformational leader whose vision had prepared the galaxy for challenges that no one could have anticipated. In the aftermath of the invasion, as reconstruction efforts began throughout the galaxy, Anakin found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him from a slave child on Tatooine to the architect of a new galactic civilization. The empire he had built bore no resemblance to Palpatine's corrupt vision or the Republic's failed democracy. It was something genuinely new, a synthesis of order and freedom, strength and compassion, efficiency and justice that had proved its worth through practical results rather than theoretical arguments. Standing in his private meditation chamber atop the reconstructed Jedi Temple, now serving as the Imperial Academy's primary campus, Anakin reached out through the Force to sense the state of his domain. Across thousands of worlds, billions of beings lived in security and prosperity that would have been unimaginable under previous governments. Former slaves built new lives in freedom. Refugee families raised children who would never know the fear of war or want. Scientists and artists pursued their crafts without fear of political interference or corporate exploitation. But perhaps most significantly, a new generation was growing up that had never known the corruption of the Republic or the chaos of the Clone Wars. These young beings took for granted the competent governance, efficient infrastructure, and peaceful interspecies cooperation that had required decades of struggle to achieve. They would face challenges that Anakin could not imagine, but they would face them with resources and capabilities that his generation had never possessed. The Force itself seemed different now, no longer divided between artificial categories of light and dark, but unified in service of life and growth and the endless potential for positive change. The Academy students who meditated alongside him represented traditions from across the galaxy and beyond, their different approaches creating harmonic resonances that enriched everyone's understanding. As he opened his eyes and looked out over the transformed cityscape of Coruscant, Anakin knew that his work was far from finished. The galaxy was vast, containing countless worlds and species that had yet to experience the benefits of imperial governance. Beyond the galactic rim lay unknown territories filled with new challenges and opportunities for growth. The universe itself stretched endlessly in all directions, offering infinite possibilities for exploration and development. But for the first time since he was a child, dreaming of adventure among Tatooine's twin sunsets, Anakin Skywalker faced that infinite future with complete confidence in his ability to meet whatever challenges it might bring. He had learned to master not just the Force in all its aspects, but the far more difficult art of wielding power in service of justice rather than personal ambition. The empire he had created would outlive him, its institutions and principles strong enough to adapt and evolve as circumstances required. The Academy of Force Studies would continue developing new understanding and techniques that would serve future generations of Force users. Most importantly, the example he had set of strength, serving justice, of power, protecting the weak, of authority earned through competence rather than claimed through birth or politics, would inspire leaders for millennia to come. Standing there in the quiet of his meditation chamber, surrounded by the peaceful hum of a galaxy at peace, Emperor Anakin Skywalker allowed himself a moment of complete satisfaction. He had taken the dark path that the Jedi had warned against, but he had emerged from that darkness, not as a monster, but as something unprecedented. A being who had learned to balance all aspects of the Force in service of a vision that transcended the limitations of any single tradition or philosophy. The boy who had once fixed podraces in a Tatooine junk shop had become the architect of galactic civilization's next evolutionary step. And in achieving that transformation, he had proved that the greatest power of all was not the ability to destroy or dominate, but the wisdom to build something worthy of the sacrifices required to create it. That's our theory. The Star Wars universe is a galaxy filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey to a galaxy far, far away, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.